And with me is Marek Suslik, a man who rode a motorcycle across Siberia. What is it like to ride a motorcycle to Siberia in winter and come back in one piece?
Hi, hello. Yes, I actually set out for Siberia, heading toward the coldest city and village in the world. A bit cold, but I was lucky enough to get some nice weather in Yakutia, and it was actually quite womanly, minus 52 degrees.
Minus 52 degrees. You were riding a motorcycle in those conditions? An old motorcycle, an oil-cooled motorcycle? Exclusively. It's not a new engine. How do you even prepare for a trip like that from a technical standpoint?
Well, seriously speaking, you can't really prepare because no one had done it before. Someone had ridden there in winter before, passed through Vladivostok, but I went left towards Yakutsk, where the temperatures are much, much lower. And basically, there's only one person I know who showed up there on a motorcycle. I was in contact with him.
But he's not Polish?
No, he's not Polish. He's Lithuanian. He covered a stretch of 1,000 kilometers. As for me, I had already done those 11,000 kilometers, so no one was really prepared for that. And there were quite a lot of issues to solve. Mainly technical stuff, like you said. When it comes to the human factor, you can always prepare somehow, stop, warm up and so on. But the real danger here was that according to all the rules and standards, at minus 45 degrees metals lose their properties.
But it's probably not without reason that coolant is made for minus 40 degrees, right? Because I remember once, many years ago, I don't remember exactly, maybe it was 2010 or 2012, Miko Kubiak was riding a Junak. He was riding a Junak, but the new one, let's say, and he was traveling through Siberia. Back then, he would ask people in Siberia, people in stores, if there was coolant for temperatures below minus 40, and they would laugh in his face saying, man, below minus 40, no engine will start. So they don't make such coolants. That's what I once heard, or maybe read somewhere. That was, as I said, many years ago.
There are a whole lot of cars there that are heavily modified. I'm not even talking about motorcycles because there are no motorcycles there. Cars are specially prepared in a particular way. Of course, all of them are Japanese cars. So in Yakutsk, Yakutia, and that whole rather large area, it's all Mazdas, Toyotas, Mitsubishis, everything is Japanese, and everything runs on gasoline. And that's interesting. Very few cars have diesel engines. When I was planning this with Aaron, because as you know I was traveling with Arawa, I had no idea we would have such big problems with the car. It was a Toyota with a diesel engine. When I left from Poland and he from Russia, because we met somewhere halfway in Russia, were euphoric, thinking, you know, it's a big car, a Prado, a solid ride. It turned out very quickly that Elsa, my Honda, was steadily moving along like a tank, while all sorts of interesting things started happening with that car.
Well, yes, because the temperature is extremely low and the road conditions are tough to snow ice, right? And now you're riding a motorcycle. As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's an old bike, but it was prepared for this because you didn't just go off recklessly. Earlier, you did some reconnaissance to get ready, mainly to prepare yourself with the right knowledge and to check if it was even possible to ride in winter. What modifications did you make to the bike? Because I suspect these weren't minor changes.
That's right, that was actually a key, crucial element. And not everyone really understood why I flew to Yakutsk by plane a year earlier. Exactly, and the point was to talk to the locals and really check what things are like over there. I hadn't anticipated that part of the car. As for the motorcycle itself, basically the entire electrical system was taken out and rebuilt from scratch, to the extent that using switches I was able to turn off each component one by one, so I could recover the voltage drop just for the engine to keep running. And a year earlier, or 2 years earlier, or even 3 years earlier, I had major problems with the electricity. That was the weakest link back then. Today, after this trip, after those 11,000 kilometers, I can say that Elsa is ready for anything. She's capable of reaching Oymyakon, or covering that last 1,000 kilometers she didn't manage before. But for example, other kinds of problems appeared on I hadn't anticipated back then, like metal fatigue, bolts breaking, and I personally experienced something spontaneous on the motorcycle. My throttle cable just snapped on its own. On the other hand, the clutch cable shrank by 2 centimeters, so these are temperatures where we simply can't imagine how metals will behave.
Alright, we already saw the skis during the previous trip, so here, as far as traction is concerned, there was no problem. But I suspect that, there was no problem with traction, let's say with the minimal basic protection needed to move the motorcycle around. But I suspect you've experienced plenty of close calls and adventures just from riding the motorcycle itself. Could you share one of those with us here? one that stuck with you the most?
There was a certain kind of repetition in the dangerous, risky riding, which was that in that area there are a lot of trucks driving to Irkutsk. That was the first element. Later, from Irkutsk to Yakutsk, there are basically no trucks anymore. They go to Vladivostok, to that main transit route where the ships arrive. Towards Yakutsk, there's basically no traffic, but trucks do drive there in the winter. All that mud, which is churned up in the summer, freezes in the winter, and those big truck huge American rigs move through there. The most dangerous thing was that in Elzand, I mentioned this too, when I was going to Nordkap 2 years ago, the brakes freeze because, well, you drive for a long time and don't use them at all, so they just freeze up. The drum brakes were completely frozen, and at the front where there are disc brakes, the pistons freeze up and you end up with no brakes at all. The whole trick is that these trucks drive right down the middle of the road, because when you're driving through the taiga, it's very elevated there. This road is kind of built up with snow, and they move right down the middle of it. We were completely invisible. Those Russians were basically pretending to be blind. They basically didn't see me at all. So those clouds of snow, which you can actually see in my videos, made it so that I had to pull over to the side and rely on braking, for example, where I quickly realized that the brakes weren't working. So after a while I had to add another precaution, basically pressing the brake every so often.
A test application.
Yes, so that this test application would keep the brakes ready for use while riding. Well, I did have the advantage of having those skis, and basically the skis make it hard to tip the motorcycle over, but on the other hand you can easily spin out. I showed in one of the videos how I was drifting with that motorcycle.
So
that's another aspect. When you brake with the front wheel, it wants to tip over, the rear swings out on the skis and you start drifting, except this time you're drifting right towards that truck, so it was very dangerous. In general, trucks in Russia...
Tell me, in these expeditions, I'm talking about the winter ones, is there still room for motorcycle adventure? Is it still a motorcycle expedition? Or is it already some kind of sport discipline? These trips, because many people probably ask themselves, why do it? That's where I'm coming from.
Let me put it this way. After this year's ride, I'll say this. I think a new sport discipline is being created.
Okay.
It requires a certain level of preparation, a certain commitment, leaving aside the resources, the equipment, the person. I don't quite want to call it an extreme sport yet, but for me it's already a certain type of extreme sport. This no longer has anything to do with the typical winter riding, like when we go to the Elefantontreffen, for example, where of course we prepare and so on, because everyone has a different sense of cold. But here we're going a bit hardcore, where everything has to be planned, so it's a makeshift, improvised approach can really backfire here.
Because on the one hand, I wouldn't want to say that this expedition was unsuccessful just because you didn't reach your destination, because in my opinion, it was absolutely a success. Just getting to that place is already top tier, right? But will you try again to achieve that goal, since we're talking about a sport?
Yes, let me put it this way. I would very gladly repeat just a section from Yakutsk to Oymyakon. If I could ship the motorcycle to Yakutsk today and ride from Yakutsk to Oymyakon, I would do it. I know now that even though I prepared in some way, it was still pretty amateurish. The people who go there, the expeditions that show up, whether they're walking, cycling, running or driving, have massive support teams, huge convoys of vehicles behind them, with medics on board. Because we're talking about a level of injury where you need medical professionals. There's also technical equipment ready to get you out of there very quickly, because an hour in that kind of cold without moving means you freeze. So I'll gladly do it again, or maybe not do it again, but rather finish it, because it's more about completing it. For me, my minimum goal was Yakutsk, and I achieved that, and personally I see it as something I wanted to accomplish, not as some kind of feat or anything like that. I just wanted to do it, and I did. I'll just point out one thing, because we tend to forget about it. I was in a situation where the longer I rode, meaning the more tired I got, the tougher the conditions became, and we kind of forget about that.
So the farther
I went, the more tired I became, because the kilometers kept adding up and the conditions I had to face, I was only just entering them.
Okay.
So it was kind of reversed.
So it would have been better to fly there by plane and return to Poland, because then you have that extra motivation since you're constantly heading back from the Pacific, right?
And temperature rises for you, so you're riding into the positives well. Positives there mean minus 40, minus 30, minus 20. And for me, it kept getting harder, farther, and colder. So that made this trip even more extreme, I would say. And you know, you ride alone, we ride alone. We know that we feel completely different after 2 days of riding than we do after a week of riding.
Of course.
So after those more than 2 weeks of riding, as it kept getting colder, I was also getting more and more tired. But paradoxically, and this is what I want to tell you, the adrenaline kept building up. I was getting more and more prepared. So my body shifted into a kind of endurance that I have to say was unimaginable. There were a few days when at minus 30 something degrees, I was walking around in a short sleeved shirt. Of course, just for a moment, like going to the motorcycle, doing something, walking somewhere. Well, people were looking at me pretty strangely, not to say even weirder, but it shows that when you're properly acclimatized, you're really able to push those limits.
Motorcycle expedition. Marek Suslik. Marek Suslik has to be properly dressed, of course, to go to a place like that, because I can't imagine going in a regular 3-layer outfit, even a basic one, across Poland at minus 10 degrees. That can also be dangerous for a regular motorcyclist who doesn't ride every day. How did you prepare for those conditions in terms of motorcycle gear?
The problem that needed to be solved, and which basically has to be solved every time, is that riding a motorcycle is, let's call it a static sport. You get on, you ride, you don't move at all. Someone is running, someone is walking, someone is riding a bike, someone is swimming. There's always some movement, heat is generated. On a motorcycle, that's not the case. This year, I came up with a trick while I was at a bushcraft, gathering people from the woods and so on, where they used completely different techniques to survive in the forest. I noticed that they were wearing woolen clothes. Just like you're wearing flannel, they wear wool. And I made a deal with one of the manufacturers, Chmura Manufactura, who make these woolen products. I asked if they could sew metis, was my own idea, so technical clothing, meaning something to wear under a motorcycle suit made from merino wool. They said, of course, that they had never done anything like that before. I told them where I was going, so it didn't really sink in for them at the time what was actually going to happen. They made it, and that's how I was dressed, not really knowing, not knowing, because I already had some previous experience. But this time I was preparing for serious cold, because I had been there a year before, so I knew you have to dress a bit differently there. I put on regular thermal underwear, then over that, let's call it merino wool thermal clothing, then Klima suit, which by the way my partner gave me for this trip, and over that my work clothes. Just regular clothes really. Their purpose was simply to protect against assault, against whatever lets air through, and so on. So that part really doesn't matter at all. What happened later during those severe frosts was that I noticed the merino wool was breathing. The wool was breathing through to the suit. The suit was breathable, the Gore-Tex let it out further, so there was constant air circulation. That wool, the human body would heat up the wool. It's a bit like wetsuit diving. If you've ever dived, you know what I mean. You jump in wearing a wetsuit, it fills with water, and then that water warms you up. Paradoxically, it was the same here, that's exactly what happened. The downside was that this only lasted for a certain amount of time, and after 2 or 3 hours that human vapor would turn into ice, it would simply freeze on the outside. And that was the moment when you just had to endure it. I had to withstand that layer of ice, which then started to give off cold like a kind of thermos. I was turning into an ice thermos.
Okay.
And unfortunately, Siberia is an empty place. There's nothing there, absolutely nothing. So to reach those oases, because that's what we call them, those oases, those tiny bars, they're 200 or 300 kilometers apart from each other. So I had to endure from one oasis to the next, and depending on how it was.
200, 300 kilometers?
Yes.
That's quite a lot.
That's a huge distance.
It's strange for me that in normal clothes, unprepared, after 100 kilometers, I usually take a break just to move around a bit.
Well, there you just can't stop. You simply can't stop there. Simply put, you can't, so you have to keep going. I would jump into that bar, we'd peel that shell off me, I'd just throw it on the floor and sit there in just my thermal underwear, letting it thaw out. And when that cycle switched, the wool and everything else soaked up the heat from the bar. because those bars are heated really strongly, the temperatures are high, so that people, those truck drivers, can warm up since it's cold in their vehicles. The cycle would change, so it would be warm again. I could head out again, and I could keep going. And that's what you mentioned earlier about extreme sports. This really is a bit like an extreme sport, because it's no longer about enjoying the drive itself, but rather you start to enjoy the struggle to survive. You simply set certain goals for yourself that you have to achieve during the ride.
So it's hiking in mountains?
That's exactly what I wanted to say. It's just like, I don't know, with mountaineering, where simply walking isn't satisfying for the climber. It's about breaking through barriers, overcoming things, clipping in one anchor after another. Here, it's kilometer after kilometer, and different problems keep coming up.
Thank you very much for the conversation. I suspect we could just keep talking and talking in front of the camera, but our time here is limited. I encourage you all to follow the White Wolf Schnigenpo Oksach page. Go on Facebook, click like, and you'll be able to follow Marek's next journeys, because I suspect next year.
Next year, yes. Since we're talking about next year, I want to sort things out a bit with sponsors. I want to look for people who will go with me, and in 2020 I'd like to do Alaska in winter. Today I know that doing it alone would be difficult for many preparatory reasons, and there the temperatures also reach 50 degrees below zero. Alaska,
And with this optimistic, albeit chilly note, even though the sun is shining beautifully, we're wrapping up.
the weather is beautiful.
Take care. So what else? I encourage you to follow Schnigenpo Ogzach and to follow Marek's motorcycle journeys. Take care. Bye.
Best regards. Bye.